But what makes it cool is that it is the only ghost story in American history where the ghost took credit for killing someone.
Does America have certain famous ghosts? Like, who are America's most famous ghosts?
I would put Abraham Lincoln on that list. I always say he's the most well-traveled ghost in American history because of all the places where he's supposed to haunt. From his tomb and where he was buried in Springfield to his home in Springfield to random places all over the country, places that he stopped at once, or places where, Abraham Lincoln slept here. Well, apparently now his ghost does too, because there's so many stories. Fort Monroe in Virginia, he stayed there a couple times during the Civil War. People claim they've seen his ghost. Ford's Theater, his ghost is supposed to haunt there, or the house across the street where he actually died. But if there's any place that he does haunt, we're back to the White House again, because it's Lincoln's ghost that everybody has seen. I mean, we're talking presidents, politicians, people who, Eisenhower, Teddy Roosevelt, Jackie Kennedy. I mean, there's just this long list of people. Truman always thought it was Lincoln that he heard walking around. Winston Churchill, in December 41, spent the night at the White House, was there to meet with FDR. And he spent one night in the Lincoln bedroom, and the next day he asked to be moved to another room. He said that he was taking a bath, and he got out of the bathtub and was walking around the room naked looking for a towel. And he looked up, and Abraham Lincoln was standing in front of him. And Churchill claims he said to Lincoln, "Mr. President, I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage." And then Lincoln smiled at him and disappeared. Yeah. Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands spent the night in the White House. She was there to speak to Congress, but she stayed. FDR was kind of backing her for political asylum, and she'd stayed there during FDR's presidency. And the next night after her stay at a cocktail dinner, she told the president that she had fainted the night before. And the president asked her, what do you mean? And she said that at 2 o'clock in the morning, she'd heard a knock on her door, so she'd gotten up to answer it. And when she opened it, and she even said, "I know you're not going to believe this, but Abraham Lincoln was standing in the hallway." And she said, and after that, everything went black and I woke up on the floor. I mean, she had no idea that Lincoln had been this long-running ghost who'd been seen. So I put Lincoln pretty high on that list because they're talking about an all-American ghost. I mean, you can't ask for a bigger one than that. Probably the other one that I would say, though, would be the Bell Witch of Tennessee. It's one of those stories that we call it a witch, but it was really a ghost. That was the term they had for it in 1814 when this whole thing started. They were settlers. The Bell family were settlers to Tennessee. And for some reason, they were targeted by what they called a witch. And it was this ghost who just wreaked havoc in their house. I mean, tore the place apart, banged on walls, broke things, attacked John Bell, who was the patriarch of the family, and his daughter Elizabeth. The ghost would always go after her too. It would beat both of them, slap them, pinch them. And this would happen in front of dozens of witnesses. I mean, and there are affidavits still on file in Tennessee from people who claim that they saw it happen. And apparently Andrew Jackson himself got involved in this story because John Bell Jr., who was the oldest son, had served with him in the army in New Orleans at the end of the War of 1812. And so Jackson had heard about this ghost story that was going around at the time and came to visit. And he and his men were actually scared away by what was happening inside the house because of all the violence and activity. But what makes it cool is that it is the only ghost story in American history where the ghost took credit for killing someone. Because John Bell died. He was poisoned. He became very sick because of the effect that this ghost was having on him. And at some point, he died one point during the night, and it was discovered that his medicine had been replaced by this black bottle that had something in it. They didn't know what it was. No one recognized it. The doctor said he didn't prescribe it. So they took some out and they gave some of it to a cat, which immediately died. So it's wherever this bottle came from, it poisoned John Bell. And supposedly the ghost, who could speak but nobody ever saw, they would hear its voice, took credit for killing John Bell. That farm is still around. The foundations of the house are still there. People still talk about the story because on that property was a cave that the family used to use for storing, like, perishable foods during the summertime. And the story is that when the ghost left the family, it went into the cave. So the Bell Witch Cave is another place I would put on the list as one of the most haunted places in America. Not so much, I'm not convinced that it's the Bell Witch that haunts it, but man, is it a weird place. Really weird. I spent the night there once in 1997. I'd never do it again. I mean, this kind of stuff doesn't really scare me. I mean, it's my job, but I spent the night in that cave, and I wouldn't stay there again. It was that freaky. I mean, all night long I kept hearing voices and people walking around. There was no one in there. I mean, it was empty with a locked gate on it. Nobody could have gotten in, and I don't know what was going on. But man, I've seen some like weird photographs and things from there, and all kinds of weird stuff happens. And I don't know. It's just kind of an anomaly.
What is your personal favorite ghost story?
My favorite ghost story is Resurrection Mary. She is, just to give it to you in a nutshell, she is a ghost who haunts the southwest side of Chicago. There's a road called Archer Avenue, and there's a cemetery on it called Resurrection Cemetery. And for years, I mean, all the way back to the 1930s, people claim that they have picked her up and have given her a ride. I mean, she's a vanishing hitchhiker story. She disappears out of the car, often at the gates to the cemetery. Now, I always say, though, that this particular story is a little different than most of the vanishing hitchhiker stories because it's not a friend of a friend story. There are real names, real people, real places, and it's the only ghost that I know of, or at least that I can think of off the top of my head, that actually left physical evidence behind. Where she was observed, she was seen standing at the gates to the cemetery by a passing motorist, holding onto the bars, looking out. A young woman was, so we'll leave it at that. He went down to the police station just down the road, told them that there was a woman who had gotten locked into the cemetery by accident, probably. So the police went back to look. A cop named Pat Homa, as a matter of fact. So there are real names in the story. Went back to the cemetery. They couldn't find anybody. And then he shined his light over on the gates to the cemetery. And the bars, two of the bars where the girl had been standing, had actually been pulled apart. And there were you can see in the photograph, fingertips pressed into the metal where it was burned because the bars were burned. It had been like a greenish color, like copper does, except now they had been burned out where it was. They were blackened and you could see the fingerprints in there. But this story is so interesting because there are like a couple of different descriptions for the ghost. I mean, some people will say she's a blonde in a white dress. Other people say she has dark kind of like shoulder bobbed hair and it's dark and she's wearing a kind of a light purplish colored dress. And why is there two stories? Well, the weird thing about it is I'm pretty sure that and this is, again, one I've spent a lot of time working on the history and trying to research it. I think it's more than one woman who died, whose now ghost is being picked up along the road. One of the first ones was a woman named Marie Bravo. Ugh, gosh, I just lost everything. Her name was Marie Bregovi, and she was a Polish immigrant worker who lived not too far away, and she was killed in an auto accident. And in 1934, March 11th, 1934, she died, was buried in Resurrection Cemetery, and within like a week, the cemetery caretaker had called the guy who'd embalmed her and said, "I saw a ghost in the cemetery," and then went on to describe Marie to a T. And that wasn't the weirdest part. The weirdest part was not long after that, people started seeing a young girl with dark hair wearing an orchid, kind of a light colored dress, running out from the cemetery gates trying to flag down cars to get a ride on the road. And sometimes she would jump onto their running boards and try to climb in the window and stuff. Yeah, no kidding. And the weird thing about this was that the people who this was happening to recognized her as Marie Bergovi. They knew her because they all grew up in that same neighborhood and they all used to go to the same place. There was a dance hall down the street called the O. Henry Ballroom, and it went on to become the Willowbrook, but they actually recognized her. And so they're like, okay, we're not going to drive by here anymore at night because we're seeing our dead friend in front of the cemetery. So that went on for a long time. And then there were the people who claimed that they had picked up this blonde. There was a guy whose name was Jerry Palis. He met a girl at a dance hall one night, blonde, spent some time with her. She asked if he could take her home. He drove her down Archer Avenue, and they got to the front of the cemetery, and she told him this is where she had to get out. Well, he thought she meant on the other side of the road, because off the road there were some apartment houses, and he offered to drive her the rest of the way, and she said, no, where I'm going, you can't follow. Got out of the car, and instead of going toward the houses, she went across the street and disappeared when she got to the cemetery gates. This guy swore it happened. He swore he spent the entire evening with her. He was interviewed in the newspapers. He was on, I think, like Unsolved Mysteries, one of the TV shows from the early 90s. And he died in 92. And up until that time, he absolutely swore this really happened.